What is a scary, unsettling fact about you? I'm convinced with no evidence that my father is still alive, and that my whole family is lying to me. I logically know he is not, but every knock on the door open half expecting my father. Could be something to work through, but it's not really affecting me day to day. My grandfather died and I thought I would feel the same way. Nope, he is dead, and I miss him, but he is dead. I lost my aunt when I was young. We were very close. I still have dreams that she comes back and was never really dead. It's awful, but I wish I had seen her body. Seeing her alive and then being told she was gone, turned to ash, it still doesn't feel real. Each passing year it becomes easier to accept, because I know she would come back for me if she could. I think our minds are just trying to protect us from the pain, honestly. I went to her funeral, but it still felt like everyone was just wrong, and she would walk in any moment. Funerals can be a good form of closure for people, but honestly, just talking to her has helped. I don't know if you do that with your dad, but for me, it's therapeutic in admitting this is the only way I can communicate with her anymore, because she isn't going to walk back through the door. If you are comfortable with your level of acceptance, that is totally fine too. There isn't one perfect way to cope with death. I'm one of the lucky few with the CAR5 Delta 32 mutation. Why is that relevant? It makes me immune to HIV and a handful of other pathogens, most notably the bubonic plague. A user replied to me with a link to a laboratory that claims to do CCR5 mutation testing. Do not click that link. It leads to a suspicious webpage that claims they will test you for CCR5 and a host of other genetic mutations for $200. The supposed laboratory is not registered with Health Canada, checked, and they have no internet history beyond their own website. Also, the user who linked this site has a 9-year-old account with under 100 karma. If you want CCR5 testing, please seek the medical advice of your doctor, and do not trust websites that claim they can test you for it. They need to figure out how to do that on purpose to turn us into a crack commando unit that was sent to prison by a military court for a crime we didn't commit, so that we can then promptly escape from a maximum security stockade to the Los Angeles underground. Today, still wanted by the government, we can survive as soldiers of fortune. That's fascinating because the establishment insists that the flexing of the lens is responsible for accommodation, seeing close, supposing that the ciliary muscle causes this biflexion. But Dr. Bates found evidence that the external ocular muscles are in fact responsible for accommodation. I haven't heard of two lenses in one eye before in all my studies. Fascinating. I wonder what that means for the theories of accommodation. I'm not a trained doctor, just a body enthusiast. I think I have the same thing. Mostly blind in my left eye, but my right eye vision is pretty good. I can wear all type of glasses as my vision adjusts to each, like a zoom as you said. When I'm relaxed my vision is average, but I focus on something to read, for example, my vision changes and I can see perfectly fine. I wear glasses though to help reduce the effort to see. Did the fact that you are blind from your left eye cause a strabismus issue? Eyeball Pro here. How did you spontaneously split and repair your crystalline lens, develop 2 sets of suspensory ligaments and train your brain to make sense of a double image falling on your retina? Not calling you a liar, but it's of no benefit to the eye and won't give you binocular vision. Perhaps you've misunderstood your ophthalmologist. Out of curiosity, how did you turn out? I've always heard that preemies are prone to be undersized and can be undeveloped later in life. However, I was born quite premature, and I've been in the 95+ percentile for height and weight since kindergarten, where I was already younger than my class because of where my birthday fell. My lungs have always been tight though. My brother and I were also born prematurely, about 13 weeks early. We weighed about 600 grams each, and were small enough to fit into my father's palm. Luckily, my brother did not suffer any prolonged damage, and I only have a disabled left arm which I can only move to about a 90 angle. This, however, almost never impacts my daily life negatively, and we're very glad to have suffered so less, especially considering that the doctors were not sure whether we would even survive the first months after birth. I was a 26-weeker, weighing 1 lb 5 ounces. Creamy power. I'm never not in awe of my early journey. My parents were told I would be blind at birth with cerebral palsy, but none of this happened to me. However, 2 years ago I began having vision issues where I had a retinal detachment and required surgery. Typically, this issue happens to people born premature who had ROP, but I did not have ROP. Also, I was very young for this to happen to. At the time I was 28, and retina detachments more so happen to those in older age, so with no known medical cause. My doctors do think my being born premature is what caused my retinal detachment. I've lost some vision in that eye due to the issue, but I do know how extremely lucky I am aside from this. Thank you for asking, and my apologies for the lengthy reply. I have an enlarged aortic root. It's very unlikely, but it could spontaneously rupture, leading to the medical term adjusts glasses instantaneous death. I would pass out, bleed to death, and then fall over, dead before hitting the ground. And it could happen at any time. My wife is very uncomfortable thinking about it. Lol. I do have it closely monitored by any number of specialists, including a cardiologist with a world-class specialty in my particular flavor of genetic misfortune. Just had an MRI 2 weeks ago, in fact. My mother-in-law has the same, but due a very unhealthy lifestyle. The doctor literally said, when she had a small leak, so not a rupture just yet. If it ruptures you won't feel a thing. You'll be dead in seconds. And then he walked out of the room and went on with his rounds. I get his bedside manner though. Her other doctor warned her that she should stop smoking and eating unhealthy and start working out, but she simply refuses and sits on her ass all day watching TV. I think he was trying to scare her, but all she felt was insult and just went back to what she was doing before. Bicuspid valve. At 29, I had an aortic root repair mechanical valve replacement. After an urgent care dear listened to my heart and didn't like the way it sounded. They sent me to an ER and they discovered it had ballooned for centimeters. The cause was I'd been born with the bicuspid valve and had been overworking all my life, and I never knew. Scary stuff. Glad you know about yours, and hopefully you're being monitored on blood pressure meds. I was flagged for this at 14 or so before going into high school, and totally upended my life for a while. Said the root diameter was just outside normal for my height. Some graph math. I was always tall and skinny. Also tested for Marfan syndrome, sometimes called Abe Lincoln's disease, but negative. No more soccer, wrestling, running, or straining of any kind. No roller coasters. They even said to use laxatives instead of straining in case of rough. Had to take beta blockers, I think atenolol, to lower heart rate and blood pressure. By the summer after junior year, I had gained a little bit of weight. The regular monitoring continued and they found the root diameter had not grown, but I had. I was now within normal again. Was allowed to effectively return to normal life. Made varsity soccer team senior year. The doc said in 16 years of cardiology work, he'd only seen that happen to one other person. Very grateful today and hoping it never returns as an issue. I wonder if there's some sort of surgery that could be done as a preventative measure. Like, in the event that your aorta does rupture one day, could a surgeon insert a backup artificial aorta to continue working? I mean, understand the deadly problem here is massive internal bleeding from the aortic rupture, not the aorta ceasing to function, although that would K1LU second. Unless there's something they could insert to contain and recirculate the lost blood from the rupture, this probably wouldn't help. Alternatively, maybe there is some kind of mechanism they could surgically implant into your aorta to effectively normalize it, so that it functions like an aorta of normal size. Perhaps this would resolve the risk of rupturing, assuming the size of your aorta. Increased blood pressure in the aorta is the main issue here. Just some thoughts. I do not actually remember a decent chunk of my life. Whenever I talk about most of my childhood, I use words that leave room for mistakes, and am generally using memories and ideas I've compiled from hearing other people say things about me. There is actually a large chunks of facts about myself that I only think I know, and don't have personal confirmation of. I do not remember most of my childhood either, and I was told that it could be suppressed trauma. However, all I remember are all of the bad moments. I cannot recall a single good memory from my childhood or teenage years. Even when I try to recall a good memory, it's overshadowed by something bad that happened around that time. I do have anxiety and depression. I'm certain that has something to do with it. I barely remember anything that happened during my teenage years. Most of the stuff only flashes in my memory if someone reminds me of it. I suspect it's some neurological case rather than trauma, since I'm so forgetful and literally forget I'm cooking something 30 seconds after I start if I focus on something else, even briefly. I'm so glad this is the top comment. I did not suffer any kind of serious trauma beyond the normal, slight bullying, etc., like a normal kid. But I have so few memories of my childhood. I have years and years of my life where I could not tell you one single thing that happened. I've visited countries I can't remember visiting. People I've spent significant time with when I was younger barely make it into my memory. It's strange, but kinda refreshing, like space in my mind that I don't need to think about. Mine's is the complete opposite. I remember too much of my childhood. Like way too much. I feel like my brain storage is packed with so many memories, sounds, music. The pros is that I catch myself smiling cause I get lost when thinking too much, and can daydream or relive the good memories of being with family and overall childhood fun. The cons is that I feel like it takes too much space in my brain and I find myself not trying to think about most of my childhood, because of fear that thinking can alter the memory. Like I can think about any memory and not alter it. The way it can get altered is by focusing too much on it, which causes me to dream it or hyper-focus on replaying that memory in my head. But a short preview doesn't hurt. But still, I feel like replaying the super good memories can make them not feel good anymore. So I save them for special occasions. That fight is always happening in my head. It's a bit of a blessing. My short-term memory is bangin', and also my memory is great for work-related stuff. Not sure why my childhood memory is mostly erased or doesn't come to mind too often. I have like a running memory of 3 to 5 years for long-term memory. It drops off sharply. I also tend to practice memory erasing. Like if I'm heartbroken, I just go ahead and erase my memory. I don't forget it, I just release emotions from it and just becomes like a fact in my head. I don't know if this is a SK1L or brain damage though. The memory then goes away on its own after that. I also actively erase memories by misremembering them over and over until I can't recall the real memory versus what I made up. Then it becomes less important for the brain to try to remember. I don't have personal trauma as a kid, but I did have a crazy amount of undiagnosed depression through puberty. I'm pretty sure a constancy chronic depression reduces the hormones required for memory. Like everyone else is saying, trauma responses and memory look very different for each case, even each event. However, I'd like to pose a possibility that may be less likely, but may at least ring true for someone experiencing similar memory phenomenon, something called aphantasia. I'm a therapist, and while working with someone and attempting to process trauma, is that she had a lot of difficulty identifying anchor points in an event, visual cues, the color of a car, the wallpaper, carpet, a light. It can go on, and it was almost like pulling teeth, not because she didn't want to go back, but because she couldn't see it. I asked her a few questions like, when you recall a memory, say the moment you walked across the stage at high school graduation, does it feel like you're playing back a movie? Or recalling a story someone told you a long time ago? She said more like a story. I asked her to picture an elephant in her mind, and asked if she could see it, and to describe certain things to me. Does it look like a specific elephant from a movie or a picture? Sometimes our brains will pick a version of what we are trying to visualize and use that as the mental image. I kinda picture a Dumbo-esque cartoon elephant. Turns out no, she doesn't see it, but everyone has always described seeing something in your head. And she kinda adapted that description to fit what happens for her when she recalls information, because she doesn't actually see it. A couple other things that may tip you off that it's something like this vs. Say, trauma repression are generally memory difficulties with things most people don't seem to struggle with as much, trauma or not. Recalling faces of people when you're not with them, in front of them, remembering, revisiting unfinished tasks and having no idea where you left off. Honestly, things that may feel like you're losing your mind, or like you have ADHD-like symptoms. Do you feel like any of that resonates? Growing up, I had a recurring nightmare set in my grandparents' backyard looking at the back of their house. There was just something off about the house, something mildly sinister. I dreamt this over and over, many times over the years. In 2018, my dad, who now owned the house, went into the backyard to that spot and K1 let himself. I haven't had the backyard dream since. Slept in my mom's bed until I was 12 years old. Everyone believed I was just a mama's boy, including myself. It was actually because I shared a bedroom with my brother who molested me. I start therapy soon. My dad had to sleep in the bed with me sometimes until I was like 10. I had the most terrifying hallucinations nightly. I'd see actual monsters coming down the hall to hurt me, not some bee shadows outside the window or a coat kind of looking like something 8 feet tall monsters coming right for me. When they punched me, I would feel a gust of wind hit me. The gust would get stronger the longer I stay there. I was afraid it would turn to pain at any time and would call for him to come. This went on from age 4-10. One day, the hallucinations just stopped. Never saw a therapist or anything. That I woke up in the middle of surgery and threw a mayo pan at a nurse before they pinned me back down and upped my dosage of sedatives. Keynote still had retractors in, so I briefly looked like a dead space enemy. Have spotty memory of it. Sedation is very hit and miss with me. Has happened 3 times. Once during surgery, once during a nerve burn. Never went out, just paralyzed for about 3 minutes, then started speaking during the procedure. The last was during colonoscopy. Seriously painful, and asked the doctor if he was an old scout leader. He was laughing, then asked the nurse if I was within range for another dose of sedative. Less scary and more shocking. But when I was 9 years old, I survived a home invasion where I was shot 6 times. I played dead on the floor until the men left and called 911, and in my adrenaline rush, I thought they couldn't find my house, so I crawled with my left arm swinging the wrong way, and my right leg limp from nerve damage, all the way to the front door when he broke in from the back of the house. I lived with only my mother, who unfortunately didn't survive. I vividly remember picking out the guy in a photo lineup while recovering in the ICU. I am very lucky to have kept my left arm. I have 32 pins and screws to make up for my shattered elbow. My left leg has permanent nerve damage, and I now have drop foot. Despite my physical injuries and PTSD, I'm doing very well. When I was 18 years old, I was incarcerated for 3 years, found not guilty, and acquitted on all charges. I had roughly 12 charges, some of which would have led to life in prison had I been found guilty. But I knew I was innocent and decided to fight my case. My best friend at the time was found guilty and given 3 life sentences. At one point, 1.5 years in, the DA offered me 7 years and 2 felony strikes as a deal, or I could roll on my best friend and go home that same day. I passed and had to continue to fight my case as I knew they didn't have any solid evidence against me. As my parents ran out of money for an attorney, I was eventually appointed a state-appointed attorney who fought for me tooth and nail. He kicked and listened to everything I presented to him about why I wasn't guilty. Mind you, I was 18 and I was surrounded by grown men and saw some horrific. I kept in contact with my attorney afterward and informed him that I was still doing well out here. He died a couple of years ago. Now, don't get me wrong, I was no saint. I was in a gang and running the streets and up to no good. But I wasn't guilty of these charges. A part of me felt that maybe it was the universe's way of slowing me down and helping me get my together. Took a short while, but I've been on the right track. This February will be 20 years since I've been released. I'm an alcoholic, gotten so bad to the point I was in jail, and I was admitted into a psych ward once. My drinking life was wild and destructive. Decided I've had enough. After 2 failed attempts, I'm currently 36 days sober, the most sober I've been in years. I opened up to my husband about it once, and he immediately called one of those hotlines which immediately started trying to weasel my address out of him without providing any help at all so they could come commit me. I was already working a therapy program and meds, and I know 5 or 6 people who were undergoing therapy and were committed like that by a well-meaning loved one. weren't able to get their correct meds at the hospital, and were treated so badly they were re-traumatized and never recovered from the damage done. So I was terrified. My therapy is working okay, but I still think about suicide a lot. Not in a way that I'm planning, but in a wistful way, like people daydream about moving to their dream country. It sucks, because I can't share those thoughts with literally anyone out of fear it will cause them to do something that really would make me K1L myself. When I was 11, I witnessed my stepdad attack my mom. I was in my room and heard my mom yell or scream, so I left my room to see what happened. When I stepped into the hallway, I'd see partly into the kitchen, and she was standing with her back up against the corner of the countertop with a terrible look on her face and a swelling cheek. My stepdad was about 5 feet away with 3 long bleeding scratches down his cheek from where she retaliated. I guess I didn't know how to react, so I just turned around and went back to my room. That weekend I spent Friday night at my best friend's house. I knew his older brother had a .38 Chief Special revolver in a hidden drawer he had built under his waterbed frame. Before I left, I stuffed the gun into my rolled-up sleeping bag. I chickened out that first night, but Sunday night, around 2-3 am, I think, I took the revolver into their room and woke him up by jamming it under his chin. He woke up immediately and kind of reactively had pulled his head back away from the barrel. I pushed it harder into his throat and said something like, "Don't ever hurt my mom again, or I'll K1L you." I don't remember exactly what I said. I do remember feeling like the world was spinning 1,000 miles per hour around me, and that I was weightless. I don't remember anything after saying that to him until I was back in my room. I dropped the gun on the floor and bursted into the hardest sobbing I have ever experienced. Seemed like it lasted for hours. I don't know how long I actually cried, but when I finally stopped, I was drenched in sweat or tears down my entire front side. I put the gun in my backpack and snuck it back into that drawer under the waterbed 2 or 3 days later, the next time I was at my friend's house. Not a word was ever said about what I did by me or my stepdad, but as far as I know, he never touched my mom again. They divorced 3 or 4 years later. I ran into my friend's brother at a bar about 10 years later, and I told him about borrowing his gun thinking he would just laugh it off as me telling drunk bar lies. He did not. He believed me completely, even stated that sometimes when I was at their house, I would make little comments that his family understood to mean that my home life wasn't great. He's a big biker type guy, and he just grabbed me, pulling me off the bar stool, and hugged me for like 5 straight minutes. He was a great dude. This all sounds over dramatic after reading it back to myself, but it's written exactly as I remember it. Thanks for the chance to share this. Until now, my friend's brother and my stepdad were the only others who knew about it. My dad was a big fan of beating me and my brother. Like, if I looked at the man wrong, I'd get backhanded in the face. When I was 15, my dad came home from work. It was late, maybe 10:30 at night. I was sitting at the kitchen table watching TV, minding my own business. I don't know if he had a bad day or what, but he immediately started screaming at me about what a fat, ugly, lazy piece of he thought I was. I didn't have the energy to deal with him, so I tried separating myself from the situation by going upstairs. He blocked the hallway and physically kept me from leaving. He got tired of that, so he pushed me backwards and slapped me across the face as hard as he could. Something in me just snapped then, and I just started wailing on him with everything I had. My mom eventually had to separate us. Both of them were telling me that what I did was unacceptable. Parents can beat their children, and the children should take it with a smile. I just looked at my dad and said, "If you ever hit me again, I will K1L you." He burst out laughing. Do you honestly think someone as stupid as you would be able to K1L someone as smart as me? I cocked my head to the side and asked very calmly, "You sleep, right?" He locked the bedroom door every night for a few months after that, but the abusive piece of never hit me again.